no, I'm not very concerned about it. Some players will always provoke strong reactions in fans, and sometimes you get booing, and sometimes you get cheering, and sometimes it changes with an at-bat one way or another. With respect to a lot of the polls, it's very difficult to put much stock in a poll which asks generalized questions like, do baseball players make too much money? Compared to what? Those are the kinds of polls which are designed to create the answer that they get. In this country, we dote a little bit on celebrities, and we dote on the money and the lifestyle of celebrities. All professional baseball players, and I think all the owners certainly fall into that category. And you're going to get a certain amount of that kind of reaction, I think.
Baseball seems to be preoccupied with its salary structure. In the early 1980s, Bowie Kuhn, in his State of the Game address, said that he believed free agency had the potential to destroy the financial structure unless we find oil wells behind second base. Is free agency destroying that structure?
Well, it's changed it a lot, and if you mean destroy a structure which didn't pay players very much, it certainly did that. Beyond that, I think that really what you see is repeated instances of the owners or the commissioners who work for the owners complaining about salaries. Whatever's wrong with baseball sooner or later comes down to it could only be solved if the players would take less. And they come up with a series of schemes, including collusion, which was a gross violation of the contract and all ethical standards, in an effort to accomplish that. But the fact is that since free agency came in, TV revenues keep going up, attendance keeps going up, player salaries keep going up, and the value of franchises keeps going up. It's pretty hard to find a lot of gloom and doom in there.
Pete Incaviglia and Fernando Valenzuela were just two of baseball's higher-priced veterans who were cut before the April 2nd deadline, when players could be released and paid only 1/6 of their salaries. Incaviglia signed with Detroit, the others didn't. Is this a disturbing future trend for you, replacing veteran players with younger players making less money?
Well, if there would be an overall trend to just reduce the number of veteran players for its own sake and pay them less money, obviously that's a problem. We are looking at these situations, and some others will continue to do so. And the Valenzuela and Incaviglia and Aldrete situations are troubling for a lot of different reasons. One of the things I'm not sure of yet, at least in some of the cases, is whether or not this is a trend we've seen before, it just looks different because the dollars are higher, or whether this is fundamentally different. We don't know the answer to that yet. I expect we'll have an opinion formed shortly.
Bob Tewksbury of the Cardinals says he is worried about the state of baseball. As a player, Tewksbury says he's happy that he has the opportunity to earn a big salary, but as a fan, he's concerned about the big contracts and how it will affect ticket prices. Is that a concern of yours?
Well, I don't know what exactly he's concerned about. I didn't see the article. If he's concerned that eventually baseball will price itself out at the box office, that's not a concern that I share. There's been no study done yet that I know of that shows a correlation between ticket prices and player salaries. And the quantum leaps in income that are coming to baseball are coming from additional people, not higher ticket prices, and from additional television and other broadcast dollars.
Do the low national TV ratings and the network's claim of losing money on baseball in 1990 give this union a concern?
Well, obviously, anytime anybody claims that there's something terrible going on, then you at least want to investigate it. You don't ignore it. However, this is not uncommon at all. You'll recall that 4 or 5 years ago, we were told that the TV package we then had would never again be equal. The high water mark had been reached. This one is worth approximately twice per year what that one was worth. And this kind of thing is common. First of all, or in addition to that, when you have a contract which is 4 years in length, you don't ordinarily measure its success or failure in the first year only, especially when the two broadcasting companies didn't have baseball before, may not have done it as well as they could have later on, walked into a recession they didn't anticipate, and in CBS's case had some phenomenal bad luck in terms of the number of games that were played in the playoffs and the World Series. I doubt that you will see again a series in which you have two sweeps and the only series going as many as 6 games between two reasonably small Midwestern cities.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Don Fehr, the Executive Director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. And Mr. Fehr, baseball will be expanding in 1993. This is something the union has wanted for a long time. It will only be to a pair of cities. Would the union like to have a say in the selection of these cities?
Well, as an academic matter, I suppose we'd like to be consulted. Everybody likes to be asked. The fact is we won't be, and I have no expectation of it, so I'm not insulted by the fact that they haven't. I just hope that since with only 2 teams there will be markets left vacant, that this real significant attention is paid to where the real markets are and where they are likely to be. That's going to be important when you're limiting the number of teams.
Should baseball just stop at 2 expansion teams, and why hasn't there been a challenge to baseball like other sports since the 1914-15 Federal League? And whatever happened to the Baseball League, which was supposed to start in 1990?
Well, I think the real difference between baseball and the other sports is that baseball has an antitrust exemption, and essentially the major leagues and the minor leagues are all one, and they sort of blanket North America from one end to the other. It's pretty hard to contemplate starting fresh or new or different, and the normal mode of attack which people would make, which would be that this creates unreasonable barriers to entry and you have a monopoly market. If you're an antitrust lawyer, you just don't have because of the antitrust exemption. As to the talk of a new league in 1990, I think it was a good idea. I think there are more than enough cities out there. For a lot of different reasons, it didn't come together. I'm certainly not privy to all of them, but it's not something that we ever counted on.
Getting back to expansion, Miami has the backing of Blockbuster Video founder Wayne Huzunga. Huzunga is also the part owner of the Miami Dolphins in Joe Robbie Stadium. They put on the Blockbuster Bowl this year, and he's good friends with Pittsburgh owner Carl Barger, who is on the expansion committee. They seem to have the inside track. It seems to be that St. Petersburg and Denver are battling for the other slot. Now, you did a survey a few years back of 23 areas. What areas are best qualified?
Well, that study was done for a reasonably limited purpose, and I don't mean to suggest that it was comprehensive in many different ways. However, essentially what we were looking at is if you look at the existing major league cities, and then you try and say, what kind of size requirements do you need to make a go of it? And how many other places are there out there? What you discover is that many of the areas that don't have teams would rank in the middle, if not towards the top of existing major league cities. And there are lots of places out there fully as big or bigger than Kansas City, which is where I grew up and has no problem drawing 2 million people year in and year out and year in and year out. Players have a very simple view of it. Of course, they're partisan because expansion means jobs. But the view is that baseball ought to expand until it becomes apparent that the product is being hurt by continuing to do so. We ought to be in favor of allowing as many people as we can to go to ballparks, not artificially restricting it. And there's no doubt that the number of franchises is artificially restricted. The owners have a monopoly.
Don, you and I have spoken in the past about baseball before expansion and baseball now. Are there enough players to go around?
I laugh at that because if you look and read your sporting newses, back to the first one they published, you will never find the day that there was enough pitching. Enough pitching is defined as everybody having 3 quality starters that could serve on a championship quality team. Of course, if that happens, then people will be complaining that there aren't any hitters out there, and so you have a problem there. I think it's safe to say that baseball's quality of play has progressed the way the quality of play in sport generally has, and it draws from a much bigger base now than it did 40 years ago. Both bigger population here, Latin America, blacks play now, they didn't until 1947, and so on. That is not something that concerns me, and if a problem would arise, we ought to wait and see it happen rather than predict something which has never come about.
Welcome back. This is our final segment with Don Fehr, the Executive Director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. During the Uberoff years, the drug issue seemed to be a major topic. Since 1988, not much has been made of the issue. Rick Leach was suspended last year, but he came back with the Giants this spring. Very little has been said about baseball and drugs. Is there a drug policy in place, or have the players been sufficiently educated to the dangers of drugs?
I think a number of things have happened. The big crisis we had essentially centered around Commissioner Uberoff's plan to have everybody tested all the time without cause or without reason, merely because you happen to work here. We resisted that as inappropriate and successfully. He then sort of declared that there were no more drugs in baseball. That was a pretty facile statement then. It sounds even more so now. But since that time, what has happened is that when a matter of a potential substance abuse arises, whether it's an unlawful drug or a prescription drug or alcohol, whatever it is, and there have been some, is the matter is handled a case-by-case basis, essentially between our office and the commissioner's office, usually confidentially, usually with the involvement of appropriate medical personnel. And we recently have begun to talk to the clubs again about formalizing some other and more concrete arrangements. I don't know if anything will come to pass as a result of that or not. The one thing I think has happened is that the nature of the substances has changed much as it has in the public generally. I think that the peak, for example, of the cocaine problem that became public was in 84, 85, and it talked about events essentially that took place 81, 82, and we're a long way from there. But as long as you have drug use in the American population generally, it would be astonishing if you didn't have it in professional sports.
Under Fay Vincent, baseball seems to be tackling smokeless tobacco. On the lower minor league levels, the short season A ball, rookie league ball, and A ball, no one in uniform can chew tobacco, and baseball is educating players to the illnesses that are connected with chewing smokeless tobacco. Would you like to see this ban extended into the major leagues?
Well, there's what you'd like to see and what's possible are sometimes many different things. Personally, I don't think anybody ought to smoke. I don't think I'm personally going to rid the United States of smoking. And personally, I don't think anybody ought to chew tobacco for the same reason. It's a health problem and a health hazard. That's different from whether or not it's part of the custom of the enterprise and whether we ought to prohibit someone from making that kind of a choice. I think the incidence of smokeless tobacco use is declining. I'd like to see it get to zero. My experience tells me, however, that blanket prohibitions tend to provoke reactions rather than progress more often than not.
Is baseball being hypocritical, banning smokeless tobacco, yet allowing tobacco advertising in stadia and outfield walls in minor league parks?
Well, I suppose you could look at it that way. I really don't tend to do that, though. The kind of advertising or signage that you're talking about has long been a tradition. It's been there in certain parts of the country. Tobacco interests are the dominant part of the economy where minor league baseball is being played. Sooner or later, the use of tobacco in all its forms will sort itself out on a society-wide basis, and that'll be reflected in baseball. But I think it would be just wrong to suggest that somehow there's some strong message being sent that baseball is urging people to smoke or chew tobacco. I just don't think that's right.
Finally, as part of the